22 News Broadcast Center. This is 22 News in Focus. This week, a preview of what will be an important year for both the state and federal governments. Here's Laura Hutchinson.
Good Sunday afternoon and welcome to 22 News in Focus. I'm Laura Hutchinson. The state and federal governments were certainly busy in 2013. In Massachusetts, tolls were reinstated and new gun laws were debated. In Washington, Congress faced the government shutdown and the beginning of the Affordable Care Act. So that makes you wonder what's in store for 2014. Well, that's where 22 News in Focus comes in. Today we'll be talking with local legislators about what they're working on for next year. We'll also hear from Congressman Richard Neal about what the federal government will be working on as well. 2014 is also going to be a big election year. So we start today with political consultant Tony Signoli of A.L. Signoli Company, who can talk to us about all the happenings of this year and what's ahead for next year. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Exciting time.
Yeah, it really is an exciting time, and this was a very busy year with all the special elections. We had casino elections in all the different communities. There was a special Senate election that Ed Markey ended up winning. What are your thoughts on all the happenings of 2013, first of all?
You know, a lot of times people talk about voter fatigue, or wow, is it a lot for the electorate to have to deal with? I think it's the opposite. I think it's people fired up. It gets them engaged. You take a look at the special Senate race that Don Humison won for the Senate.
Sure.
That brought a lot of folks out in communities that had not been out in a while on a race like that. It's all good. The Markey race. The referendums also. We think we learned a lot from these referendums too. We saw two incredibly well-moneyed efforts, long-term efforts in Palmer and West Springfield by large corporate entities that were funded these campaigns to the tunes of millions and millions of dollars, and they were defeated by average regular folks coming out and spending very small amounts of money in those communities, in Palmer and in West Springfield. I think what all of it shows is that folks getting involved can actually still make a difference. The vote still matters. And I think we're also seeing something else. As we're starting to poll and take a look at 2014, especially in western Massachusetts, in Worcester County, there seems to be an engagement of the electorate because of all these elections in 2013. They're starting to think about it. And we all know that 2014, there's a lot of big prizes. As you mentioned, there's the U.S. Senate race, but in all those constitutional officers, you know, governor, treasurer, auditor, it's all there. There's been an awful lot of campaigning and a lot of reasons for people to get involved.
And this isn't even a presidential race, and that's the one that we always see a lot of people come out. But like you're saying, it just sounds like this has certainly energized the base a lot, that a lot of people are getting out and getting involved in some of these. So let's talk about some of the upcoming races. We actually have Don Humison here later on the program. We can talk about if there's been any decision yet as far as his seat's concerned. But as far as the Markey race, who are you thinking is going to be running against him in that race?
Well, I'll tell you, most folks would think it's a difficult race to take on a United States Senator who's able to raise an awful lot of money, who's got a large profile, who will have the help of the other members of the congressional delegation, all Democrats in the House who will be there to help him, certainly the established base of Elizabeth Warren and Deval Patrick, the Democrats. But watch Louis Evangelides, the sheriff from Worcester County. There's someone who's starting to take a look at it, and what's unique right now about Massachusetts, and I think that's something the Republicans learned in the first Scott Brown race, when Brown won amazingly against Martha Coakley, is that not everything is just solidly Democratic this time around. We're seeing in polling right now something we haven't seen since 1980 and 1988. There's an openness of a lot of independent voters, unenrolled voters, to think Republican. So I think Louis Evangelides is a name that we're hearing about, and I'm hearing it in Washington, and we're hearing it out of Boston as well, as a possible contender. I don't think you'll see a Democratic challenger to Senator Markey, but most definitely I think the Republicans will put somebody up into this race.
And what do you think the Republicans are going to be running on? Is this solely the Affordable Care Act here? What is the big issue that you think the Republican who runs against Markey is going to be running on?
Well, you know, it's unique. The state, as far as the Affordable Care Act is concerned, is not that concerned overall. Independent voters, unenrolled, to most folks here in Massachusetts, it's an fait accompli. It's not that big of a deal. If there's a Republican to take on Ed Markey, it'll be on other issues of fiscal nature for the most part. It's still pocketbook issues that move and motivate folks, and especially as we're watching a lot of change in Worcester County. I know it's something that Congressman Neal keeps an eye on as well. There's a lot of change there, where folks are thinking more independent-mindedly than they are partisan-wise. So if a candidate against Markey can hit on those pocketbook issues that make a difference to everybody, whether they're a Democrat or Republican, they could find themselves with a bit of a platform. The other thing we're seeing right now, this is the year that I can finally say for sure that the largest party in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is no longer the Democrats. It's independents and unenrolled. Those numbers are large. So that's the prize. And what's great about that for anybody that cares about politics or good government, it makes both sides work harder for those votes.
Sure.
You got to have those independent votes if you want to be the governor of Massachusetts, Democrat or Republican.
Okay. How do you see our overall economy here in Massachusetts? I mean, we're talking about the unemployment rates and everything. We do have State Senator Stephen Brewer here today, who has said that he's sort of seen the growth in Massachusetts slow down a bit. What do you think when you look at our state? What does our state need?
We represent a lot of corporate clients too, some who are very large, international clients, international corporations that are here in the Commonwealth, and a lot of smaller mom and pops and whatnot as well.
Yeah.
And we hear from them constantly, the concerns and the issues that they've got of doing business in Massachusetts. But relative to the economy, and I'm sure that Senator Brewer can probably speak to this much better than I can, for a lot of us that live in Western Massachusetts, it's two economies in Massachusetts. The economy of Western Massachusetts is greatly different than that of Eastern Massachusetts, the hub of the universe, Boston. And that's why it's so important who we elect to these legislative seats, to the House and to the Senate. Because for most of them, it's not like Humison R. Westfield after his name, or Brewer D. Berry after his name. It's more so like it's WMA after their name. You see our delegation out here, the Western Mass crew, get together more collegially than others and other bodies in the United States and fight for Western Massachusetts, because we really have two economies here, very much so. I know there's some legislation that I think that Senator Kondaris and Senator Brewer have signed on to. Senator Kondaris and Chairman Wagner in the House fighting for new focus on manufacturing jobs. That's gigantic. We've been hearing about this forever in Western Massachusetts, and I think they filing this legislation, working on this together with Congressman Neal, that can make a difference in Western Mass. But it's two economies, Laura.
Okay, and two names that you mentioned earlier on the program, Scott Brown, Martha Coakley. We of course know Martha Coakley has an interest in jumping in the governor's race. What about Scott Brown? Where do you think we're going to see him? So you don't see him as a potential contender in the Markey race. Do you think he's jumping states to New Hampshire?
I think he's looking at New Hampshire. Certainly that's the speculation. But he put out a significant letter on the internet to a lot of key Republicans in New Hampshire just a few days ago, sounding off on the issues that he thinks that are very important to the people of New Hampshire. He also put on another piece on the internet defending himself from those attacking him from kind of jumping ship and going to New Hampshire. The reality, anything that Scott Brown does is also good for the brand Scott Brown. If he stays as a lobbyist, if he keeps doing the things that he's doing, if he remains in that neck of the woods, that's good for him. All this noise, all this speculation, it's free advertising. So what he's going to do exactly, I think we'll have a better idea in the next 2 or 3 months. But even if he doesn't run, he's done a lot to help himself with the business of being Scott Brown.
Yeah, just getting his name out there in and of itself. And of course, at the end of next year, we'll know who our next governor is going to be. We haven't had one in a very long time. I guess I don't really need to ask what I think the big issue that they're going to be running on is the economy here in Massachusetts. Anything else that you think that those candidates need to represent in order to win that race?
Well, clearly what we're seeing right now is each of the candidates is trying to forge out a niche for themselves. Martha Coakley talking about mental health, and that does resonate with an awful lot of folks. Certainly what we see from Steve Grossman already at this point is that he's talking about, I'm not just running as a Democrat, don't just judge me as treasurer, but as a business person. So I think economy will be where you see Grossman go. The others that are in the race, and I won't go through every single name, we even have an independent candidate this time around for governor. But I think a lot will be talking about quality of life and economy for people in Massachusetts and what the future is after DeVal Patrick.
And of course, we're always looking forward to the presidential race. That's something we're constantly watching. What names do you think you're going to see? Do you think it's going to be 2014 that we actually find out exactly who's in? Do you think it's going to be Hillary Clinton? Do you think Chris Christie? What are you hearing?
You're seeing a lot of maneuvering right now in key places and in key states. Not just what we see in the general media, where Chris Christie said this today or Hillary Clinton may have attended that, but you're starting to see the players behind the scenes for these folks. They're consultants, the people that will set the groundwork for them. You're seeing them in Iowa. You're seeing them in New Hampshire. Certainly we're seeing Chris Christie in all the key places that his people need to be for him, setting the stage. Hillary Clinton, the big name, doesn't need to do as much of that groundwork. But watch Andrew Cuomo now. In just the last few days, it started to get out and around that he's got people out there maneuvering and doing things. And a lot of us who are old enough still remember 1992, when it was always Mario's coming, Mario Cuomo the father. And the Cuomos and the Clintons have a grand history in that regard too, both as friends and as adversaries. So I think Cuomo may be a real player in this thing. Of course, we've all heard the news about Elizabeth Warren. It's astonishing. In a significant piece of polling, CNN, it came out that of all the people polled, Democrats and independents in the poll, her name came up third for President of the United States, which is amazing
Unbelievable.
because, you know, in the real world of politics that we live in, she's been in the United States Senate for 2.5 seconds,
Right.
but she's created that kind of a buzz.
And before that, she was a professor.
Exactly, and she's made it very clear she's not interested, but that's pretty intriguing. I like that too because it puts some unique focus on Massachusetts.
Yeah. Now, what is it about Elizabeth Warren that made her shoot to people's minds like that? What do you think it is?
She's tough. She's stuck by her guns, and whether you like her or don't like her, whether it's a Democratic look at her or a Republican thinking about her, a lot of the things that she's campaigned on, she's actually done. She's kept promises. Enough so to be willing to take on the White House. She's taken on the President of the United States on issues where she feels that he's fallen short. A guy who endorsed her, who worked for her, who went out there and helped her to win this seat. But yet she's got the chutzpah to basically say, Mr. President, I disagree with you on Wall Street, on banks, on bankers. And that's intriguing. I think that's gotten her a lot of credibility, especially where she needs it, independent voters.
Okay, and we are getting close to the end of our time, but I do want to talk to you about what you think is going to happen in 2014 as far as, of course, we're going to see the full rollout of the Affordable Care Act. What do you think about how that's going to sit on President Obama's legacy? Of course, a lot can happen in 2 years before he's finished, but do you think that they've referred to this as sort of his Katrina. Do you think that this is that severe? Is this something that we're going to remember him by in a positive or negative way?
It's not so much how we're remembering it now. It's not so much the reality of the issue, which is bad enough. This was not done well. This is a signature piece of legislation, a signature effort. It should have been done flawlessly. There's no question about that. And the president's made his apologies, and the folks around him have as well. What it comes down to now is not so much the reality, is the perception again, and how folks in these 2014 congressional elections running for the House and for the United States Senate are going to portray this. There was no issue for Republicans just a little while ago until the rollout came out. And Republicans were hard pressed in a lot of key battleground contests. You know, their big headache was going to be the shutdown of government. You know, that was their headache. That was their problem. And this unfortunate rollout of how this worked out and whatnot has taken that issue away. It all comes down to how the consultants play this piece, how the folks that blow the blue smoke and bend the mirror, so to speak, are able to portray this in these campaigns. I think it's going to be a problem for the president, and it has become an issue, certainly already, for a lot of Democrats running for re-election.
So is this going to be an issue that all the candidates running are going to disassociate themselves with? It's just interesting to sort of have sort of a heads up about how they're going to play this game. How do you think the candidates are
I'll
going to
tell
play
you, I've
this?
seen it from Louisiana to Iowa. I'm watching a lot of Democrats who had thought this would be something that would be just a middle road issue for them, not to get too hot on, too against, too for, depending on how their state felt about this overall. They're now distancing, very, very much so. And you may even see a situation where some of these folks running for re-election would prefer to have another major player in the Democratic Party come out to campaign for them than even perhaps the president, if you were to offer it to him. They'll stay away. This is a difficult issue for the average person to understand. They understand it as it affects them themselves. If it had a negative on their own insurance policy, on their own health care, if they feel it negatively impacted their family, that's bad. And these members of Congress and their consultants are going to be smart enough to say, we need to be careful. So let's find other issues that are a lot more important to the folks in Peoria, so to speak.
Okay, political consultant Tony Signoli, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. It certainly will be, it has been an eventful year and will continue to be an eventful 2014, it looks like. Thank you so much. We'll keep an eye on what you were talking about. And after the break, we're going to talk about what's going on at the State House with 2 state representatives from Western Mass. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Today, we're taking a look back at changes made in 2013 and some of those top priorities lawmakers have for the new year. We're talking to some of our state representatives in both the House of Representatives and the State Senate about their different priorities. Joining us first today to discuss what legislation is pending in the state's House, we have Brian Ash of Long Meadow and we have Nick Boldiga of Southwick. Thank you both so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very nice to have you on. Can you believe we've gone through a full year? We're starting a new year. I know. It happens every year,
goes
right?
by too fast.
Goes by so fast, I know. So when you look back at 2013, what are some of those top pieces of legislation? What were some of the changes made that pop out to you? How will you sort of remember 2013 when you look back?
Well, there's too many to talk on in this segment, but some of the important things are our focus on education, early education as well as higher education, the commitment to UMass is to make sure that tuition doesn't go up for the next year. I think we had a $489 million investment for UMass here. And as I mentioned, early education, most formative years for our children. Some of the other things we were talking about before, the Valor Act with veterans, to make sure that veterans are taken care of when they come back from serving our country. This is the second time in a couple of years we've done that to make sure we do as much as we can for our veterans.
Yeah, so what changes specifically are included in that? Obviously that's an issue that people talk about all the time. I know there's a huge backlog for when veterans get back from serving, and we're creating new veterans every single day. So
yeah, a few of the recent ones were if when a vet comes back from overseas, for instance, if they need to get some sort of certification or license through the state, we can expedite that process for them so they don't have to wait several months to fill out the paperwork. Maybe if it's a CDL license and they have that training in the military, we can basically expedite that for them, make sure they get that CDL license or some sort of a certification through the state. If they have the training, they don't have to wait for it. They don't have to take the extra test that they've already taken on the federal level through their military training, and kind of basically get them up and running faster so they don't have to wait and have a lot of downtime, so we can basically get them out into the workforce much faster.
And this is something that you said that you've had for the last couple of years. Is this still something that there's more work to be done? Is it something we're going to be seeing in 2014?
Of course, we'll continue to look at our veterans and anything we can do to help them when they come back, whether it's giving them a little money to jumpstart them when they get back, to help them with job training, to make sure they have housing. Anything we can do, we need to take care of our veterans. And I think that's one of the things that's across the board, whether it's Democrats, Republicans, House or Senate. We know how important our veterans are to us personally, as well as to the nation. And
you also mentioned education as well. You said early education and higher education. This is something we also hear all the time. College students are constantly getting out in enough debt that they have basically a mortgage to pay. And early education as well. We have some schools struggling here in Western Massachusetts. So what kind of changes are being put forth to help out those schools?
I mean, on the higher education level, and I put myself through college. I'm still paying off my college loan, so I can absolutely relate to the higher costs of receiving a bachelor's degree and associate's degree, and wanting to basically make it less of a hurdle for people to want to pursue higher education, because when they come out, they're burdened in debt. They can't get a job. It's, the economy is a tough market right now to find employment, and especially not only find employment, but a lot of people are underemployed. So if you can't meet your financial obligations to pay back your student loans, one of the things, there's a subcommittee right now addressing the high cost of higher education right now, trying to make it more affordable for kids once they're getting out of high school to go to UMass, basically keep down the burden. We were happy to help out the UMass system this year so they don't have to increase fees and tuition for students, to kind of keep the costs in check. So it's easier for people to kind of get out of high school, go to college. The student loans that you have basically assimilate into the, being an adult, and make that as easy as possible in making people's dreams come through. Like I said, I'm the first person in my family to go to college. I know what it's like. I worked hard, and we want to make sure that everybody has that same desire, that same dream, that they can accomplish it.
And as somebody who's been through the system, what can you do to prevent that brain drain, so to speak, when people get out of college, they come here to Massachusetts, go to our schools, and then leave again, or they're from Massachusetts and go to the schools and then leave. How do you prevent college students from leaving? I mean, what can we do to sort of, keep people around?
We've been trying to make our state more competitive in the business industry, and we've come a long way over the last couple of years. We want to make sure that people do want to stay here, whether it's the younger people or the older people, that our industries are competitive, that we have manufacturing, that we have technology jobs. And we've done a lot of legislation to make sure that the businesses want to stay here, that it's more affordable for them to stay in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and thus having more jobs for our students that are more competitive than other states around the country.
Actually, just a tangent off of that, that Representative Ashe mentioned, I know that Senator Humison and Senator Brewer are going to be here later on, and in Western Massachusetts, and Brian and I both have attended, we have a large manufacturing business here, and a lot of the monies that we've helped put forward to are grants to make sure that high school students are aware of the Voc schools they can go to. We actually had a roundtable this past year with a number of the CEOs and owners of a lot of these machining and tooling industries, and that a lot of their starting wages are in the $60,000 to $70,000 range for skilled labor. So some of these other initiatives we're doing not only are to make college more affordable, but if you decide that the track for you is to go to a vocational school and get into the skilled labor market, that those jobs are very high paying. We want to provide grants and incentives initiatives to make students aware of those same initiatives. So that's another track that they can pursue, and a lot of those are very lucrative, very high paying. You might not have the loans you come out with, but if that's the track that you'd like to pursue, you have that same opportunity, and especially in Western Massachusetts, you can go to work in one of these industries and actually stay and live here and give back money to our economy, shop here, buy a home here, and raise a family here.
So how is this sort of going to translate in 2014? You know, what sort of changes or legislation or what's going to be enacted? You know, what are we actually going to physically see in the new year that can address some of these issues we're talking about? Is there new pending legislation or an interest to at least move some of these forward? I don't know if there's...
The machining and tooling I've already mentioned on. That's already in place right now.
Okay.
We usually try to do a certain level of grant funding for that, basically just to bring awareness to it that, you know, hey kids, if you decide that this isn't the track for you, there's all these other alternatives available that you can pursue. And it's kind of on an annual basis we do that. One of the industry, the association actually put out this great video. You know, they show in high schools to bring awareness to it, because a lot of kids aren't aware that there's this whole other world out there of these great skilled labor jobs, the career path that you can take with these positions. You know, becoming an owner of we have you know, a lot of in East Hartford, Connecticut, the aerospace industry is huge. Whether you go to get an engineering degree, you can come back and actually stay in Western Massachusetts. There's tons of manufacturing facilities around here that make specific aerospace parts. So I mean, this is something that we've done going forward. The same thing with, like I mentioned earlier, there's a subcommittee right now meeting to address the high cost of college education. So they're working on that continuously, and it's really an evolving process. It's not so much, you know, 2013 ended, so the legislation ended this year. 2014 we pick it up again. It's really an evolving process that goes forward to bringing awareness to the industry, how we can you know, perpetually help people with just bringing information forward so they know that it's there.
Sure. So that's certainly something that we'll be looking forward to in 2014. Are there any other pieces of legislation that just simply didn't make it through this year that is a topic of interest, or maybe it's very important to your specific you know, community? I know that the Transportation Secretary was in East Longmeadow taking a look at the Rotary. We're going to be seeing some transportation projects come about. I don't know what's very important in your districts that you think that you'd like to see come about.
That was in part of my district in East Longmeadow, the Rotary that, you know, anybody that lives in Western Mass knows about how treacherous the East Longmeadow Rotary can be.
I'll say it, it's awful.
It is awful. And that's one of the things, and the I-91 viaduct is one of the projects that, you know, we'll be getting to in the next couple of years, you know, from I-91 by State Street all the way up to 291. We want to take a look at all the transportation out here. You know, we've gotten a bad rap over the years with transportation that a lot of the money goes to Eastern Mass. So, you know, we're trying to take care of some of the needs that we have out here. And some of the legislation that's carried over from last year to next year, you know, we have the minimum wage debate going on. There's the casino that continues to take twists and turns as to what will happen, what will we get anything, where will it go?
Right.
So there's a lot of pieces of legislation that'll continue to carry over that will start up with the new year, as well as I think we talked about it another time on In Focus, the gun violence.
Right.
What we'll do, what type of legislation will pass that. We went around the state.
Rep. Naughton was,
with the Public Safety Homeland Security Committee. We went across the state on kind of a listening tour to see what people had to say about that, and trying to make sense of it without being too rash, without making any haphazard decisions. We want to do something that makes sense for the Commonwealth and for all of us here.
I'm glad you brought that up. So where is that bill right now? Did anything pass on that yet? I remember going through from Eastern Mass all the way to Western Mass, all over, and I know that there was some kind of an idea in place. Has that been addressed?
Well, what we did after listening, there's you know, as you mentioned, going across the Commonwealth, we're taking all those pieces and trying to craft something that makes sense. You know, the mental health portion of it, the time limit that people wait, the background checks. As I mentioned, we don't want to do anything that's too haphazard or too harsh. We want to do something that makes sense for everyone. We don't want to just do something to do it, to have a you know, just to say that we passed legislation. We wanted to have it make sense.
Sure.
Brian and I are actually both on the Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee, so we attended all of those committee hearings throughout the state. In Springfield, I don't know if you were there or not, there was several hundred people there for, we were there for roughly 10 hours that day. Really big turnout. You know, people like the Mayor Sarno of Springfield testified that they don't believe that more gun laws are the answer, because we have some of the stricter gun laws on the books. It's a mental health issue that we have to address, figure out how we can help people basically before some horrible crime happens. So I think we're all on the same page with that. We do have some of the most strictest gun laws in the country,
right.
and hearing the police commissioner of Springfield, the mayor of Springfield both testify that more gun laws and gun control laws aren't the answer is kind of the resounding sound that we've heard throughout the Commonwealth. And I think we're all focused on working on that going forward.
Yeah, it sounds like you got a lot of input, at least, in a lot of those meetings, and we're hearing some of the same issues, at least, from the different
And it really brought both sides together. I think both sides thought they were so far apart, and there were more similarities than there were differences, and it helped bring that together.
Very good. Representative Brian Ash, Nick Valdigo, thank you so much for being here and talking to us. Good luck 2014. Looking forward to some of these new pieces of legislation that you're talking about today. Thank you. And we spoke with representatives from the House. After the break, we're going to talk to members of the Senate. So stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about what we can expect from our state and federal government in 2014. We spoke with political consultant Tony Signoli earlier on the program about some big elections coming up. And we talked to members of the Massachusetts House of Representatives about what they're proud of from 2013 and what they're still working on for next year. Now let's find out what's on the priority list in the state Senate. Joining me today, we have State Senator Stephen Brewer with us of Barry, and we have Don Hummelson from Westfield. And Mr. Brewer, you are the chairman of the Senate Ways and Means Committee. It's such a pleasure to have you here today.
It's great to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here. We're just kind of wrapping up 2013 and looking forward to 2014. I know that you spoke recently just about the growth of Massachusetts and some of your concerns after the recession. We were moving along great and it started to slow down. Tell us again just your thoughts about where we are right now.
Well, you're talking about 2014 calendar year. We're beginning the process of the fiscal year of 2015. And yesterday, Senator Hummelson and I, we were involved with the consensus revenue forecast for the economic speculation of what revenues will be available for the state budget and for our priorities as well. I think you're interested in some of the unfinished business, perhaps of last year. We have a welfare reform piece, the economic independence, we refer to that as, that needs to be reconciled between the House and the Senate. Senate has passed their version in June. The House has passed theirs recently, and we're reconciling the differences, understanding that the best social program is to have a job and to make sure that we can help alleviate the dependency on state resources for all segments of our population. We also, as the representatives mentioned, finishing touches on what we call the Valor Act, the Veterans Act. We also have to finish on compounding, pharmaceutical compounding. 59 people lost their lives by having tainted drugs produced by companies that didn't have the highest standards for health and integrity. And we need to bring completion to those. But we are beginning the process of this budget now, and we're looking at a growing economy, steady but slow. I think that the marginal changes that Congress made over this last few days will be helpful to our sense of purpose, that we will not be reaching fiscal cliffs, and that will help Massachusetts, because the defense industry, you don't have to be too far from this studio to hear the jets flying over Westover Air Force Base. The investment in higher education, the fact that Springfield is going to have a satellite campus of the University of Massachusetts, and has been mentioned earlier about investing in our infrastructure by forward funding the regional transit agencies to help Pioneer Valley Transit Authority, Mass Broadband Initiative, a lot of your listening-ship now, your viewership in Western Mass and the Berkshire County, to make sure that they have the highest technology that metropolitan Boston does for their computer services, et cetera. So there is much on our plate. It's an ambitious agenda, but an agenda that I believe that has withstood the scrutiny of the bond rating houses. Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch's have all given Massachusetts' budgetary process AA+ ratings, the highest bond rating in the history of our Commonwealth, and the third highest reserves of any state in the Union. That shows that we have been doing a management of our economy with discipline and with forward thinking.
So why do you perceive the economy as sort of slow moving then? What do you attribute that to? What do you think has happened?
Well, I think was said earlier that there are two economies. There is a metropolitan high-tech economy, the biopharmaceutical technology economies in the greater Boston metropolitan area, and to make sure that what we are doing in central and western Massachusetts, and that requires good transportation infrastructure, that requires good communication infrastructure to make sure. But our unemployment rate is still better by a point better than New Jersey's. Our unemployment rate is still better by well over a point than North Carolina's, we hear oftentimes. But we are now getting on a pace with the national unemployment rate. We want to do better, and we are not going to sit by and wait. We're going to invest in our businesses as well. I do want to let Senator Humison have a word in here.
Right, and Senator Humison, new to the Senate, newly elected in there. Congratulations on that again. How is that going? And
well, thank you.
Yes.
Very well. And I have to thank the chairman. He's been very gracious with his time and helping me to make the transition into the Senate. Senator Brewer's right. I mean, a lot of the things he mentioned about the state of the Commonwealth's economy, absolutely true.
Sure.
It was interesting to hear at the hearing this week, the consensus revenue hearing, that a lot of the problems that we may face with our economy in Massachusetts aren't even caused by us, by the government, or by the folks in Massachusetts, but a lot of the uncertainty is a product of what's going on in Washington, D.C. And I know you're going to have Congressman Neal talking about that and about what he sees for the future of our federal government. But I think it's frustrating for folks like us in public policy positions here at the state level when we are dealing with things that are beyond our control, with uncertainty in a business economy, a community that's caused by policies out of Washington, by the fiscal cliff, by sequestration, and just a feeling of malaise on the part of people about our federal government. We have to do our best here at the state level to make sure that we do not just our own work, but the work that needs to be done everywhere to really help our business economy improve. Because, as the senator mentioned, when things are going well with our economy, everything else can take care of itself. We'll have the revenue generated in taxes and employment and that kind of thing to help with the other programs that we both feel that are so important to provide.
And you mentioned the federal government as well. We all know that we lost a congressional seat in Massachusetts. What can be done? What can we all be doing, or what can our state lawmakers be doing to ensure that that doesn't happen again? What needs to be done in the different districts to ensure that Massachusetts is in good standing?
Well, have larger families, I suppose, but our population actually has increased, but not at the rate of some of the Sun Belt states have, and we understand that when we're shoveling snow and thawing pipes out in January and February. I did want to segue from Senator Humison. 40% of our export economy goes to the European markets. That's a huge amount, and if you've got European nations like Greece and Spain with unemployment rate that are of the Great Depression levels, that depresses our economic viability for exports. And we are sometimes held hostage to the uncertainties in Washington and the global marketplace, uncertainties in the Middle East, et cetera. So working on energy independence, we're seeing now a greater emphasis in Massachusetts on solar power. Solar farms are growing everywhere, green energy technology. Those are areas that will be job producers. We recently had a solar field at the Scottish Meadows golf course in Warren that is going to be one of the largest ones in Massachusetts.
Sure.
And those are important. That helps us alleviate dependence on foreign oil and making sure that domestic supplies in that regard. But I would like to go back to precision manufacturing as well, because a machinist's job will pay as much as a state senator's job will, if not more.
Sure.
And those are good jobs at good wages. The Workforce Development Act that we have done in putting about $18 million into job training programs for the employees. I recently was with a consortium of 5 businesses in southern Worcester County, and they are so grateful. The short amount of $103,000, it shows the business ownership that the Commonwealth values their employees and for the skills and the training, because it isn't our investment into 15 community college systems in our state as well, and asking for performance metrics on graduation requirements and employability for these community colleges. And make no mistake about it, having a presence of the University of Massachusetts in downtown Springfield will grow and pay dividends throughout the valley.
Senator Brewer and Senator Humison, we're going to continue this conversation. We're going to take a short break and we'll continue this. There's still a lot more to talk about it. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Welcome back to 22 News in Focus. We've been talking with state lawmakers about what we can expect to see on Beacon Hill in 2014. One thing we haven't talked about this year is the upcoming elections. Of course, we have to talk about that. Senator Humison, excuse me. I'm still transitioning
I do it all the time.
too.
Don't worry.
I'm sorry. We are looking forward to seeing who's filling your seat in the House as well. What is the update on that as well? Do you know?
As of yet, the Speaker of the House and the Secretary of State have not decided whether to schedule a special election. If they did, you're given a short window of maybe 3 months or so, which is what I had in my special election for Senate. That would put the winner sometime early in the spring next year. It's about the same time that we would have to be getting nomination papers out ready to run for re-election in November. So anybody who would win a special would also have to, immediately upon winning, start again. So that may figure into what the Speaker is thinking. I don't know. I haven't heard from him yet, but they may just decide to leave the seat vacant, which is a bit problematic because there'd be no representative in the House for the city of Westfield. I could certainly do my part to try to pick up the slack with the Senate and with the constituent work, but it remains to be seen whether there'll be a special or not. Obviously, we're ramping up, of course, for next November when everyone will have to run for re-election, and any new people would have to step in then.
Yeah, it sounds like it really could go both ways, actually.
Yeah, it could
you have
be
to weigh
either way.
the cost and the benefit
There's definitely a cost to the city. They'd
Right.
have to pick up the cost of that special election and then do it all over again in November.
Sure. Wow. That'll be interesting. And we all know that everybody's up for re-election, really, in November, including the governor as well. How difficult is it for you as lawmakers during an election year? We all know that politics happens during an election year.
I wouldn't want to speak for Don Humison, but I will anyway. Don Humison is everywhere, as I am everywhere. Elections are not won during election years. They're won every day of every year that you are in office. It's by going to your events, by being responsive to your constituents. The seat Don has was held by probably one of the most respected constituent services people that that area had in a long time, and Mike Knappich. It's getting back and treating every single person that has a problem. In your office, that problem may not be unique. You may have heard that problem from your staff 50 different times. But for that individual, that's unique and that's special, and they deserve the respect. I tell my staff, it doesn't matter what party affiliation or anything else, that you try to give them their access to their government. But it will be an interesting year because all of these seats, as Tony mentioned earlier in your broadcast, that will be open, and 7 ballot questions that have been certified relative to how many patients a nurse would have on the Mass Nurses Association issues. So that on that particular ballot, we would urge everyone to read the summaries that the Secretary of State puts out relative to these ballot questions. Ballot questions generally are pretty well synthesized, but the intricacies of public policy often get sent back to the legislature for tweaking, as I know you had an interest relative to the medical marijuana issue as well, when the Department of Public Health had to work for months upon months to work on regulations, to get on standards, to make sure, because no matter what you do legislatively, there's always the law of unforeseen circumstances. And we saw that now on the gaming issue in Boston. What would happen if you have a 5-person gaming commission and one person recuses themselves from voting in this, and now you have 2-2. But the law hasn't provided for that kind of a tie vote if it should ever come to that. So there's usually the law of unforeseen circumstances, but an informed citizenry is the best bulwark for democracy, and to make sure that people do their homework. Most public policy does not fit on a bumper sticker. It's far more complicated, and to understand the nature of, to try to fix the I-91 viaduct or the rotary in East Long Meadow, or so many other things. It's important that everyone stay involved and learn the issues on all sides.
Okay, and you just mentioned the viaduct as well. That's a very important project here in Western Mass for all communities. Do you see that the money is going to be there to get that project done? You know, we've heard from different people how serious of a matter this is. Is this something that you think that we're handling appropriately right now? Are we moving at a speed that we should be?
When it comes to Western Massachusetts, and this is true for Senator Humison's predecessor as well, that we operate as a team. When it was Brian Lees was the minority leader, we all operated as a team when it comes to making sure. You know, I recently toured the museums in Springfield, and I was so taken with the quality and the artifacts that are there, and what a family-friendly environment that is. I'm a big fan. I'm a big booster of Central and Western Massachusetts, and we will continue our efforts. What we have done on regional school bus transportation, special education, circuit breaker money, payments in lieu of taxes for state-owned land, access for the Quabbin Reservoir and the recreational activities that can happen up there as well. All of those things to make sure that this is our time. This is our time, because where I stand on a hill looking to Boston, I see 34 state senators, and when I turn west to the New York border, I see 6. So you got to use our collective muscle as a team.
And it looks like, just from what we've been hearing from the different segments, medical marijuana dispensaries, gun control legislation, just a very quick wrap up, and also welfare reform as well, right?
Yeah, and we'll come back for a short year. We adjourn by July 31st in the next year, in time, of course, for the elections and electioneering. So there's a lot to be done, including the state budget, of course, in that limited time.
Okay.
I look forward to working with Senator Brewer and the members of Ways and Means and all of my new colleagues in the Senate and House.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much. Senator Humison and Brewer, thank you both so much for being here. It is really nice to talk to you both after a very busy year and looking ahead to 2014. Thank you so much. And we are going to talk to Congressman Richard Neal after the break, so stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Today we've been taking a look back at 2013 and looking ahead to 2014. We've heard from some of our local state lawmakers. Now we're going to talk to Congressman Richard Neal, who's joining us via satellite today. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be with you, Laura.
Now, many people are wondering what's ahead in 2014, what we can expect from our lawmakers next year. Before we talk about that, I want to just kind of wrap up 2013. What do you find to be the most memorable pieces of legislation from 2013? What do you think of when you look back on the year we just finished?
Well, I think the most memorable piece of legislation was actually the vote to reopen the government of the United States. It was inexcusable that we had reached that point. It was totally unnecessary. And if you recall, the new year began with an opportunity to address the tax cuts in terms of top rates for the wealthiest individuals in America. So New Year's Eve was spent here in the Capitol working on that very issue. So those are two of the events that quickly come to mind.
Now, do you think that we're going to be faced with another government shutdown in 2014? How did we leave it with that? That was a huge topic. I'm glad you brought that up. Where are we? I mean, is that something that you think we're going to end up seeing again?
No, I don't think so, largely because of the pain that was, I think, inflicted on the American people, conceivably will be felt at the ballot box. Again, it was inexcusable and totally unnecessary, and you could see that the deal that we had after 17 days was essentially the deal we could have had on the first day. Okay,
now we did start to see in 2013 the rollout of the Affordable Care Act. We're going to see that really roll out the full extent of it in 2014. What do you expect from the rest of the transition of this?
Well, many of the problems that confront the rollout are technical in nature. What happened, again, was inexcusable. There should have been better preparation. The president has acknowledged that, and he's accepted responsibility. I think that the technical aspects, again, they're going to go much better. I think the sign-ups will increase. And I think, Laura, as many of these initiatives are actually instituted, people are going to be more receptive. And not to miss the point that many have already gone into effect, including women's health care, a ban on pre-existing condition, lifetime caps, and allowing 26-year-olds to remain on their parents' insurance. Those are very important achievements already.
Okay, many people are wondering how that rollout is going to work out in 2014, but there are a lot of other issues that Congress is going to have to look at, some things that you just couldn't get to in time for the end of this year, like the Farm Bill, that's one of them, also tax reform. Talk to us about where we are with tax reform. What do you expect in next year?
Well, at the moment, tax reform is stalled. There's no question of it, and largely that's because of the fact that as long as tax reform is spoken about in the general or the generic, you have a lot of support. When you get to the specifics, people begin to fall off once they find out what's being proposed. And I think that's kind of where we find ourselves. I think Chairman Camp, the chairman of our committee, who's a Republican, has really done a nice job in terms of laying out the model. I think that it's been more difficult for him to lay out the specifics and have them received. So my guess is that early next year, there'll be an opportunity to take a pretty good measurement as to what can and cannot be done. But I can tell you this, there's one thing that we all agree upon, and that is that the current tax code distorts economic reality, and it is very inefficient and very unproductive.
Now, do you think that there's going to be both sides agreeing on that? Is that something that you think we'll see some resolution on early on in the year?
Well, my suggestion at this point would perhaps be some baby steps to build some confidence, and that, in my judgment, I think it's always important to approach tax reform based upon what I would call transitional rules, meaning that there would be a slow but steady transition to the new base of tax reform.
Okay, and how about the Farm Bill? Looks like that's something that's going to take us into the next year. Where are we on that?
The Farm Bill, I think, is going to be passed even as we speak based on what is known as a provision called unanimous consent. And I don't think the Democrats will ask for a vote. It will only be a temporary extension of the Farm Bill, meaning that it will give the negotiators a longer period of time to find an agreement.
Okay. And what about the immigration reform bill? Should we expect any kind of movement on that? It's something that I feel like we'll talk about for a number of weeks and months and then stop when something big happens. Are you going to be revisiting that issue?
Well, the Senate has already been prepared to act. The president is on board, and we have voted for a pretty decent piece of legislation in the House. I think the difficulty is going to be to convince Speaker Boehner, not so much of his own position, but of the members that he leads in the House of Representatives as to the fundamental need for immigration reform. Laura, when the President of the United States, President Obama, says, register, learn English, and get in line, I think that that's a pretty good starting point in this conversation. So my sense is that it's long overdue, it ought to be done, and not to forget that many of the people that we're addressing, even at this moment, are individuals whose parents or grandparents hail from another part of the world.
Okay, and what about minimum wage as well? That's something we've seen a lot of people here in Western Massachusetts standing out, trying to get an increase in the minimum wage. Is that an issue you think we'll take up next year?
Well, Massachusetts has a more progressive minimum wage than America does, but I do think addressing that issue on a comprehensive basis here in Washington is a good idea. And raising the minimum wage, which has been stalled for a long period of time, I think puts a dent in poverty.
Okay, and how about the U.S. Supreme Court expected to render some kind of a decision on birth control next year? It is expected in June of 2014. Could impact companies that are now required to cover certain reproductive health services without a copay. What is your position on that? As we're seeing some of these healthcare changes, we're going to see some massive changes in 2014.
Well, I think that we always find ourselves in an element of surprise trying to predict what any United States Supreme Court is going to do as recently as the Affordable Care Act. So I think we're going to have to wait and see what the court does. And clearly the issue that they're going to take up will have far-reaching consequences.
Okay, we've been talking to some of our state lawmakers on this program today. One issue that we did talk about is maintaining our congressional seats here in Massachusetts. As you know, we did lose a seat after the last census, and there's talk of Massachusetts possibly losing another one. What do you think we can possibly do to keep people in Massachusetts?
Well, actually, the Massachusetts population has continued to grow. The question is, does it grow fast enough to keep pace with Texas and Florida and California? That's always been the issue. The House is fixed at 435 seats, and my guess is that this is still a process that's 10 years out. So we can begin right now a better counting procedure, but always in the end, the most accurate counting procedure is critical, given the fact that in 1994, we lost a seat to the state of Washington based upon a count of 35,000 people.
Okay. Anything else that's near and dear to your heart that you're hoping to see? We've talked about some of the bigger issues that have been in the news. I know that you've done a lot for veteran services and that sort of thing. Is there anything else that you personally are hoping to take up in the next year that may not have gotten the attention you think it deserved in 2013?
I think the focus of the Congress and the President ought to be on the issue of unemployment. Laura, if this unemployment rate were 4.5% to 5%, the historic post-war norm, you would be having a very different conversation here in Washington. Pressure on social spending would go way down. Economic growth would not only go way up, but revenue would go way up based upon personal income taxes coupled with capital gains. It would change the economic forecast considerably.
Okay, and just, we are coming into an election year. Any concerns about, politics kind of getting in the way of some of the, very important pieces of legislation that you need to be working on? There's a lot of big topics we've talked about. What are you thinking as we're heading into this election year? Not even presidential, but of course everybody's up for re-election this year.
Well, the pundits always say that you can't do big things in an election year. Yes, you can. The country needs a big infrastructure bill. Highways, airports, roadways, bridges. For example, Union Station, I expect, will be underway. Rail transportation from New Haven to Hartford to Springfield will be underway. There is talk of the viaduct being changed in downtown Springfield. There are proposals at Pittsfield. There are proposals at Holyoke and Chicopee, all of which will augur well for investment. We in Washington ought to be able to agree on a big infrastructure bill. We haven't done one for a long time, and I think that that would be very helpful to all in an election cycle. Okay, Congressman Richard Neal, I want to thank you so much for joining us via satellite. I know that you're busy down in Washington, but it is really nice to hear from you just on your thoughts of 2013 and looking ahead to 2014. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Laura. Okay, and that is our program for today. We hope you learned something. We spoke today with a political consultant. We talked to some of our state lawmakers here in Western Massachusetts in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. They talked all about bills that just didn't get passed in 2013 and what they're looking forward to in 2014. We've certainly covered a lot of ground from our state lawmakers and hearing from Congressman Richard Neal down in Washington as well. That is our program for today. We want to thank all of our guests for joining us today. If you've missed any of our program, you can watch it in full on our website at WWLP.com. From all of us here at 22 News, thanks for watching. We wish you a wonderful Sunday. Take care.